All right, give another second for the chevra to come on. Every second counts over here. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Tezvav. We are in the second daf in the sugya of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim. We are again dedicating this class to Le'ilu Nishmas Chaim ben Rachel. That's Kevan's brother. May he have it for Shalema. Amen. And also just to mention that Yaakov pointed out, beautiful, Yaakov Komaiko, that as we are mamish b'hashgacha pratzos right before Chanukah, it's beautiful that we are learning all of these dinim of Tumah and Tara. Okay, so we began with the Mishnah yesterday. We explained the Shita of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim, that the Mishnah was speaking about in the Beis HaMikdash, us allowing to burn kachim that are tamei on a level of a shlishi, with kachim that is tamei on a level of a rishon, being that it has to be burnt anyway, it's invalid anyway, it's tamei anyway, even though when you burn them together, if they have halachic contact, the shlishi can go up to be a sheni, you're being moisef tumah. Rabbi Chanina said, he testified that was okay. Hoisev Olav Rabbi Akiva, we explained that the case of the Mishnah is that you have truma, oil, that's a shlishi, and it's tamei, shlishi, it's pasul, because that's the end of the line. You can put it in a lamp, in the nair, that's a av, and we explained how the keli becomes an av. Here, it's not only going to be going up one notch, it's going to be going up two notches, same concept, but it's a chiddush, that even here, you're going up two notches, you're taking it out from the level of pasul, you're bringing it into the level of tamei, it's going from a shlishi now into a rishon. That was also something that was done. That was the first part of the Mishnah. Now, actually, at the end of Daf Tezvav, we're going to tweak, or we're going to add another approach in a detail, Beshitas Rabbi Chanina, but more or less we covered that. Now, the Gemara on Daf is still Yudalo Damad Beis, went on to the next part of the Mishnah, where Amar Rabbi Meir Midivreihem Lo Madnu. From their words, we learn that you can burn Truma, that's Chametz, Chametz Dika Truma, Tahira and Temeya. Tahira L'chayna means completely Tahira. You can burn it together. Now, who is Rav Meir referring to? Midivreihem Lo Madnu. So we already are up to the third explanation, which is the first one that stuck. So just quickly reviewing it. So the Gemara pointed out, does he mean to say Midivreim from Rabbi Chanina? How can you compare the case of burning Chametz, Truma, Tahira, and Temeya together? Don't forget, we burn it on the 6th hour. In the case of Kachim, Tamei and Tamei. Here, Rabbi Meir is saying that you can burn Truma, that's Tahira. I know that it's Chametz, but it's Tahira. Can't be from Rabbi Chanina. The other approach was fine, so he learned it from Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says it can be that Midrash refers to Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva Taka is not speaking about Tamei, but he's speaking about Pasul. There was some invalidation in the oil. It's not as bad as Tamei. In other words, it's the level of Shlishi, like we explained, it cannot pass it on. But here again, Rabbi Meir is saying that you can burn Truma, that's Chametz, that's completely to hide it with Tamei. It can't be from Rabbi Akiva. So the third approach was the first one that stuck is, that Rabbi Meir is referring back to Rabbi Chanina. But here we added a nuance in Rabbi Chanina. How exactly did the kachim that's a shlishi become a shlishi? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Chanina is speaking about kachim that midoraisa is bechlal ma'tamei. It's tohoira. It's a shlishi midrabanan, as we explained yesterday. And nevertheless, in the Beis HaMikdash, says Rabbi Chanina, they would burn something that the kachim that midoraisa is completely okay. They burnt it with kachim that's a rishon midoraisa. And why did they do that? How were they allowed to do it? This is where we left off yesterday, because we're going to see at the end of today's daf, we're going to go beyond that. But where we left off was because since Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Meir, they are subscribing to the rule that ein oichel metama oichel midoraisa. So why would you not be allowed to burn them together? Bechlal, food cannot be metama food. Midrabanan, it could be metama food. Midrabanan, it's already a shlishi. That was the case in the Mishnah where they were allowed to burn it together. So for that, says Rabbi Meir, oy bazoi, being that on the 6th hour of the day, midrabanan, you already may not have even hana'ah from chametz, right? We burn it, you can't have hana'ah. So it's completely invalidated on the rabbinic level. And again, when you put two foods together, midoraisa, one will not contaminate the other at all. But now it will contaminate midrabanan, it's invalidated. So here, Rabbi Meir Taka had the beautiful limud. It's very similar. It's exactly like the case of Rabbi Chanina Skana Kahanim Kachim. Now, what is not explained yet is that if it's such a good proof that Rav Meir has, according to his understanding, what did Rabbi Yossi mean when Rabbi Yossi says Eino min Hamida? Now, all of that will have to be explained today. But the Seder of Daf Tezvav will be that now that we have just explained the third Midivrayim, which stuck, we're going to give today another two. We're going to introduce two other arguments between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, not the one that was quoted in the Mishnah. Two arguments that they have in Masechtas Trumas, and we're going to have a fourth explanation that will be rejected, but then a fifth explanation that will stick again, which we're going to end up with two explanations, the third and the fifth. And the Midivrayim B'chlal doesn't refer to the Mishnah. So now that we're going to conclude with that, the Gemara is going to, through teaching the meaning of Rabbi Yosef, once you understand what Rav Meir means, now we have what to work with. Now we can explain what does Rabbi Yosef mean when he argues with Rabbi Meir and he says Eina min Amida, that it's not analogous. And we'll have to understand why is Rabbi Yosef indeed saying that. We're going to introduce a sheet of Rabbi Yechanan, which has a Gavaldik Chiddush, who says that Rabbi Yosef only argues with Rabbi Meir that Rabbi Yosef says you cannot burn chametz dikatruma, that's tohira, with tameya on the 6th hour. On the 6th hour, all of the isurim, hana, hachila is only midrabanan. But Rabbi Yosef is moida that on the 7th hour, you are allowed to burn them together. Even though guys also appreciate that even on the 7th hour, the truma that's chametz is not tameya. I know that it's asun mido iraisa, but it's still not tameya. But Rabbi Yechanan says he will agree. And once we introduce Rabbi Yechanan, then we're going to really come back for full circle, and we're going to explain the shita of Rabbi Yossi. And ultimately, at the end of the daf, we're going to bring in a machlekes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi as to whether tamei beverages have the capacity midda oiraisa to make food or other liquids impure. So we learned yesterday on daf Yud Daled this machlekes whether oichel can be matama oichel midda oiraisa or not. On Daf Tezvav, Amid Beis, we'll learn another machlekes whether mashkin could convey, they could become, whether they could convey tuma midoraisa or not. And all of that will help us better understand the argument in our Mishnah between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. Basically, with Hashem's help, we will conclude at the end of Daf Tezvav or Daf Tezayin on the top, explaining the Mishnah. We're not the thank God, the Baruch Hashem, Rabbeinu and Ravashi had Rachmanas on us, and they gave us another 5 daf of this. But after these, for yesterday and today, we will mamish break down and explain this Mishnah beautifully. Good. So we left off on Daf Tezvav Amid Aleph, in the beginning of the second line, on the top of the Amid. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol na'im v'dvarim. We explained the Midivrayim. It was very successful. The only thing that the Gemara again doesn't go into yet is, so what? How did Rabbi Yossi refute that? It's such a great comparison. But before we do that, here we have another 4th and finally 5th explanation in the Mishnah. Amar Reish Lakish, right? Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says in the name of Bar Kapara that our Mishnah, meaning Rabbi Chanina, not like you needed to say in order to make it work, in order to make Rav Meir work, that the Mishnah was speaking about a shlishi midrabanan. Who said that? No, I disagree with you. Our Mishnah is speaking about ba'av hatuma do'iraisa, right? The Reisha. The Avatuma means that the Kachim that are a Rishon, they had contact with an Avatuma Do'iraisa, which means that they are a Rishon Midoiraisa. And also the Vlad Hatuma, and if you remember, we learned on Daf Yudalid, Vlad Hatuma doesn't mean that the meat of Kachim touched a Vlad, because then they would only become a sheni. That was the whole issue in the beginning of the sugya. Even if it's a sheni and you're burning a sheni with a rishon, you're not doing anything wrong, because a rishon, anyways, if it has contact, it will render whatever it touches into a sheni. So you're not adding tuma. So we already explained yesterday, Vlad can also be a generic word. Vlad means the child of the Av. Yeah, specifically it goes to a rishon, but the Vlad in the Mishnah we said is Vlad. So then you had a piece of kachim that touched Vlad, it touched the sheni, which means it became a shlishi, but not like you said that Rav Meir understands Rav Chanina is speaking about a derabanan, also the oiraisa. But now we're back to the question. Because if that's the case, how can Rav Meir compare burning truma, tahira, and temeya, that's chametz, from the case in the Mishnah that both pieces of kachim are anyways middo oiraise tamei. So says Reish Lakish, no, you don't understand Rav Meir. Umayim Debrayim, not from the din that we learned in the Mishnah, not Rav Meir, not Rabbi Akiva. He's referring to the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. That's not mentioned in the Mishnah, and it was from there that he drew this analogy. Now, says the Gemara, Hi Rabbi Yeshua. Now, really, the Gemara should have said, Hi Rabbi Eliezer ve Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara does not say that because, as we will quote now, and ultimately succeed in quoting Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, we'll see that Rav Meir actually is picking a side. The specific comparison will be from Shitas Rabbi Yeshua. So that's why the Gemara says both. It's from the Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, but what Rabbi Yeshua is Rav Meir comparing the case of Chametz Dika Truma Tohir and Tameya too. It's like Ilay Mohar Rabbi Yeshua, Ditanya, Mishnah and Trumais, Chavis shel Truma, Shenoilad lo Safik Truma. You have a barrel of Truma, and there is a Safik whether it is Tamei or not. I'll appreciate that when it comes to Truma that has a Safik, it's called limbo in English. Limbo means, what are you going to do? See, the mile of Truma over Kachim is that if Truma becomes Tamei, it's not Asur Bahana. You use it for fuel. So let's say if it's oil, Amachaya, people, mamish, used oil to burn their lamps. So burn it, use it. If it's Tohira, Amachaya, eat it. If you have a suffix, it's not like be machmer, don't eat it and burn it. No. If you have a suffix, you can't do anything. Because since it might be Tohira, we're not allowed to burn Truma Tohira, even though you benefit from it. But Hashem wants you to eat it. That was the pasuk that we quoted. That's on pasuk in Parshas Koirech as mishmeres Trumoisoi. That we have to guard the Truma. Guarding it also not only from not becoming tummy, you have to honor it. So limbo is the worst. So what do you do with a barrel of Truma that is a suffix? Now, before we go on, Chabal Azman, but we have to speak this out. Didn't we mention a few days ago how by Sveikas there's really three different rules in the Torah? The suffix mamen, we say that Hametz Mechaber Olavaraya. Then you have suffix Isur, suffix Daraisa Luchumra, suffix Daraban Lukula. But by suffix Tuma, we had a klal. If it's B'Reshus Harabim, we're Mekel. If it's B'Reshus Hayachid, we're Machmer. Why don't we use those rules over here? That's the big question. So quickly going into a place that's already on Daf Tezvav Amid base, you just turn over to Amid, and on the second to top line, it's very important because we're going to learn many cases of Safik Tuma. We have to get that clear. So the Ri has a Gavaldik Chiddush. His Chiddush is like this, that the case, all of the cases, and we're speaking about our case, is that you had two barrels in a Reshus HaYachid. And the suffix was that someone who was Vadai Tomei entered the room and for sure touched one of them. You don't know which one the person touched. Says the Ri, here we cannot apply suffix Tuma b'Reshus HaYachid. You're going to be Machmer, Tomei. I'm reading inside the Tosfos. The Hashtas are Tosfos stay to Luyos the Var Torah. The whole source that if you have a suffix Tuma b'Reshus HaYachid, we have to be Machmer, we say Tomei. That's because that was the case of the Soita. Even though the Soita is speaking about Arayas, but the Torah refers to the case of a Soita as Tomei. We don't know whether she became Tomei. Who was there, the man and the woman, two people. So let's go like this. By the Soita, if we're going to be Machmer, it's possible that what we are saying, Taka happened. We're going to say, we have to suspect that she Taka had a relation with that man, and the man can never be with her until she undergoes the procedure. Okay, that might have happened. Torah says, be Machmer. Over here, when you have a suffix on two barrels, what are you going to do to be Machmer? You can't be Machmer only by one. What are you going to do? You're going to say they're both Tamei. We know for sure that they're both not Tamei. The guy that walked in there says, I only touched one. I just don't know which one I touched. So here, if you're going to go with the rule, Safik, Tamei, B'Reshus HaYachid, Tamei, it's not going to be like Soita. Here you're going to say something that you know for sure is not emes, like Tosfos says. When you have one doubt, and when you're going to be Machmer, like by the Soita, it Sheyachali is emes, says the Ri. But whenever the Tuma, in this case, will be on both, will for sure, both won't be emes. You don't apply the rules of Safik, Tamei, B'Reshus HaYachid. That's very important. Let's come back over here to our side of the daf. Okay. So what happens over here? So Rabbi Eliezer says, if this barrel is in an exposed area, That means it's more susceptible to Tumah. It's more likely that something tummy will have halachic contact. When God says that we have to guard Truma, Hashem wasn't only speaking about guarding Truma Tohira, Hashem was also speaking about guarding Truma, that's Teluya. You have to guard it. Put it to Markem HaMutzna. When you guard it, that means it's going to take much longer. If ever it will become tummy, so be it. And until then it's in limbo, so be it. You have to guard it. If the barrel is uncovered, then you have to cover it. It's everything you have to do to take precautions to prevent Truma from becoming tummy, you need to do, even when there's already a suffix and there's nothing you can do with it. Not you can eat it, not you can burn it. Rabbi Yeshua says no. That you're not going to be matamit. But if it's in a more private place, put it in an open place, put it in an exposed space. If the barrel is covered, you gotta reveal it. Really, the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua is contingent on the word in Koirach Terumoi Soy. That's the way it's read, but it's written in a way that you could read it Terumasi. In other words, Yashin Lachid, Lashon Yachid, Lashon Rabim. Rabbi Yeshua says that you can learn the limud by reading the word B'Lashon Yachid, that God only commanded us to guard one type of Truma, Truma Tohira. Truma Teluya, you don't have to guard. Rabbi Eliezer learns that you should read it, you should learn from the way it's read, Terumoi Soy, Lashon Rabim. God, you have to guard two types of Truma. Not only do you have to guard Truma Tohira, you have to guard Truma, that's a suffix. So now what's the comparison? Since he is allowing you to bring the barrel of Truma into Tuma, okay. So here also you can burn it together. That's the Havamina here. Says Rabbi Meir, it's going to become Tameh, Nishkeferlach. We're not bothered with that. Says the Gemara, hold on. Midame. Now, by the way, you're doing it over there for a reason. You're doing it here for a reason also. It's there, there's nothing you can do with it. If there's nothing you can do with it, you don't have to guard it. Here, there's nothing you can do with it. Because from the 6th hour, even Shitas, Rabbi Meir, can't eat it, you can't have Hana, nothing you can do with it. But the Gemara says, Midami. Over there, Grama Ba'alma. No, it's not, Rabbi Yeshua never says that you can be Matamit. All he says is that you can actually put it in a place where the likelihood is even greater for it to become Tameh. Yaakov, consequential. But I used to call causative. But over here, Rabbi Meir is saying burn it together. That can't be the case. Good. Ella, this is the 5th case. So now we're going to have, this will be the final case here today. We're going to end up with the 3rd and the 5th of explaining the Rabbi Meir. Ella, Rabbi Yeshua. It's another Rabbi Yeshua, also in Trumas. And it's not in the Mishnah that we just learned about whether you have to guard Truma Teluya will be used today on Amid Beis. So you have to remember it. But let's come back to our Mishnah. You have, my friends, a wine press. In the times of Chazal, the wine press was a double-decker, was a 2-story area. The top one is where you would actually press the grapes, and there was like a upper vat. Once the wine went into the upper vat, it flowed from there into some bottom reservoir, and it was over there that it would sit and it would ferment. Whatever is in the upper one will trickle down to the lower one. Now listen to what happened. The barrel, on top, in this upper story of this wine press, you had over there wine, Truma, Tohira. Great. Problem is, there was some sort of leak that should not have been there that's allowing right now the wine, the Truma wine in the upper vat to drip into the lower reservoir. What's down there? Down there you had chulin, that's tummy. I don't think we even need a picture. We had chulin, that's tummy. Now what's the issue over here? I'll tell you what the issue here is. There's nothing wrong if chulin is tummy. You can consume chulin, that's tummy. If Truma falls into chulin, if the bottom reservoir has 100-to-1 ratio, if that would have been the case, but that's not our case, then the Truma would become batel. But that was not the case. So when the Truma falls into the chulin, being that it will not become batel, so we're going to treat everything in the bottom like Truma. Being that the chulin is tamei, so what falls in there will become tamei. So now the Truma, the wine that's on the top, will become tamei. We want to prevent from the Truma becoming tamei, and we don't want to ruin the chulin. See, when the chulin is tamei, you can drink it. But if the chulin now becomes, because it's mixed with truma, like truma, if it's going to be tama, you can't drink anything. Now, what will be the solution? The solution is that you have kalim near this vat that you can put a keli and you can stop the wine from falling into the lower reservoir. You can gather it in this new keli. My question is, what happens if the keli that you have access to, the keli is tamei? Now, it's falling into a tamei place anyway. But can I use a keli that's tamei to capture the truma? Here, I'm not saving the truma. The truma is going to become tummy if it goes downstairs. It's going to become tummy if you capture it in the vat, in your new keli. But at least you're saving the chulin. Chap the case? So the truma is ke'ilu damned. It's getting ruined. But can you be metamed the truma b'yodayim by putting a tamed keli? What are you benefiting? You're saving the chulin. So the Mishnah says like this. If that if you have near this wine press a keli that's tahor, even if it's very small, but how small? At least the size of a revius, which means it's a chashuv size, says the Rosh. Then you have to grab, now you have a large keli that's tamei, you can save a lot more wine, or you can prevent a lot more wine from going down, but then all of it will become tamei. If you have a tamei big keli, and you also have a tahor little keli, as long as the keli that's tahor is the size of a revius, you have to first capture the falling truma into the tahor keli. Even though all of this time will mean that you only saved a little bit of truma, the rest of the wine will pour down, the chulin downstairs will get ruined. The first goal is to save the truma, preventing it from becoming tamei, and if there is such an option, then you have to do that. However, v'im lav, you don't have any tahor keli with you, or if you have one, it's very small. It's a kelishka. It's not the size of a revius. So anyways, you cannot save a chashuv amount of the wine that's truma. It's going to become tamei anyway. Rabbi Eliezer holds you still may never be metama the truma b'yodayim. Date, let it trickle down, and v'titma. And even though it means that the bottom vat with the chulin will all become tamei, the truma is becoming tamei, the chulin is becoming tamei, but the Aliyah tameno biyad. But don't grab a barrel that's tar, a barrel that's tamei. Don't grab the barrel that's tamei and have the wine trickle into it. Not that you're going to be saving the wine. The wine is going to become tamei. Here you're even making it tamei a moment earlier, but at least you save the chulin. Rabbi Eliezer says you may not do that. Rabbi Yeshua is the one that says, if yitameno biyad gavaldik, that you are allowed to be metamed biyad. Why is that? Now understand, in the case of Rabbi Yeshua, when you are capturing the wine that's falling down into the tamei barrel, now it's not tamei, not the oraisa, not the rabbanan. Why does he allow you to do it? Here we're going beyond what we ended off yesterday with. Here we're saying, look inside Rashi, around 12 lines under the Gemara, that Rabbi Yeshua holds, reading inside Rashi, the kiven the soifa leibud. It's going to fall in the bottom vat. It's going to become invalidated. Ibud doesn't mean tummy. It happens to be tummy, but it's not about it becoming tummy. It's going into being worthless. So therefore, shari litamuya biyad. Now you have a great analogy. So by Pesach also, right? Pesach also, since the chametz is going leibud, the soifai leibud, I know that it's tahira, but so what? It's chametz. So you can be metamed biyadayim by burning it together. That's a great analogy. Now let me just give you a little nuance, a little kanech over here that we'll see in Amud Beis. If this is the reason, if this is what Rav Meir is referring to, yesterday when we learned the third explanation, we were emphasizing that why is Rav Meir allowing you to burn it together? Because you're burning it b'shashishis. B'shashishis midrabanan, it's already asur b'hana. According to this, one might say that if this is the rationale of Rav Meir, you can even burn truma tameya with truma tahira, even on the 4th hour, even on the 5th hour, as long as you know it's not shaykh for you to eat it. There's no one for you to give it to. So it's going to get ruined, like the wine. It's going, and you're putting it in a tummy de kekeli, you are making a tummy a moment earlier. Doesn't matter. That's what Rabbi Yeshua says. It's futile, your efforts. Like Bazo, you can be metama b'yadayim. Wow. Okay. Now, here's interesting. Now, this ihachi, whether this ihachi, my friends, is going dafka on this last answer of Reish Lakish, whether this ihachi is going on all the answers, I know you can learn the Gemara in both ways, because you can argue that this question should really be no matter how you learn, could be. Or since we brought a machlokes that's not even mentioned in the Mishnah, it makes it even more problematic that why does Rav Meir say the word in plural, midivreihem lamadnu, those are the words of Rabbi Meir, he should have says midvarav, because he's only relying on Rabbi Yoshua, not on Rabbi Eliezer. Now again, maybe the kasha is even on what we learned yesterday, or maybe not, because yesterday, even though the exact comparison was from Rabbi Chanina, but Rabbi Akiva said something similar to Rabbi Chanina. He was moisef. So it comes Rav Meir from this topic. It's more shaykh to say medivreim, even though here also, according to what we learned yesterday, the third explanation is Rabbi Meir doesn't learn anything from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Meir only learns it from Rabbi Meir only is soymech on Rabbi Chanina, but maybe it's less problematic than Lashon Rabbin. Be that as it may, it's a problem. Why does he say medivreim? Says the Gemara, Chikamer, mimachlokusam shal Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua over there in Trumais lo madnu. And indeed, Daikaname, because in our Mishnah, right after Rabbi Yossi tells Rabbi Meir, Eina min Amida, mitamol, they bring in a Moide Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Like, Mandachar Shemei. The flow doesn't go so good according to the first three approaches. Again, the third one was the one that stuck. So indeed, Shema Mina, that midivreim lomadnu is not from our Mishnah, it's from another Mishnah, from another machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. That's the Maila of Reish Lakish's, the final approach. The Maila is that we don't have to say, like we said yesterday, at the end of Yudalad Amid Beis, that the case of our Mishnah was the Shlishi was only Midrabanan. Nowhere does that say in the Mishnah. No, our Mishnah is Ba'ava to Medoiraisa, Velada to Medoiraisa, which makes the comparison to Truma a non-comparison, which means that Rav Meir was not referring to not Rab Chanina nor Rab Akiva. Indeed, okay. I'm sorry. Here we got a problem. Problem is that we have Braises, and the Braises Kedarkom Bakoidish, they elaborate the Mishnah in more words. The Braisa that is on our Mishnah and Daf Yudalid that elaborates, as we'll see clearly shows us that Rabbi Meir is referring to our Mishnah and not to Absadin and Trumas. Because it says in a Braisa, Omar Rabbi Yossi, here's Rabbi Yossi's rebuttal. Now we are at least beginning to explain why Rabbi Yossi refuted Rabbi Meir. That ain't a nidim doimel l'ra'aya. Right, the subject under discussion, what are we discussing? Can you burn a truma, chametz dika truma, tameya with tahira, being mekama the tahira while you're burning it? Right, it's not analogous to your proof. Now we're going to see what the proof is. Because al mehi'idu, what did they testify about? Clearly, it's not about the case of the wine. Here it's our case that im alabasa shenitna bevlad hatuma. Guys, again, vlad hatuma doesn't mean a sheni. Means basar that became tummy through a vlad. Basar, that's a shlish. Shesarf and oisamim abasar litma ba'avatuma, that you can burn it with kachim, that's tummy on the level of a rishain because it had contact with an av. Because clearly Rabbi Yossi is saying zetame, v'zetame. And even if you want to bring the raya from Rabbi Akiva, that was even more lenient. Im ala shemen shenim sabut full yoim, that's a shlishi. Truma shlishi is not called tummy, but it's called puzzle. That yes, we are allowed. I believe your testimony that they used to burn it in a neir shenitma b'tmei meis, and if it's a metal neir that had contact with a tmei meis with an av, it becomes an av, right? Cherev hareu kecholol. So you have bigger chiddush. So the oil is at least puzzle, and the neir is tamei. So says Rabbi Yosef, well, af ono moedim, that betruma shenetmeis bevlad atuma, or bevlad vlad, he is also moida that if you have truma, that's a shlishi, that and you have chametz, and you have truma that's chametz on the level of a rishon, I also am moida that you can burn it together. Shesar fenoisam imatruma shenetmeis ba'af. That I agree to you, but that's not what Rav Meir is saying. This is Rabbi Yossi's elaborate rebuttal. You see clearly from what Rabbi Yossi responded that Rav Meir was making his analogy to the case of our Mishnah to kachim. Even Tuluya should not be allowed to be burnt. Even Tuluya. Avada not Tohira. Now, why not Tuluya? Because Tuluya means we don't know Well, says Rabbi Yossi in the Braisa, so what if you don't know? Now, I know that it has to be burnt anyway. It's Vadai Chametz. It might be Tohoira. But he says, Shema Yavo Elyahu, Baruch Hashem, the second time already in Pesachim, Elyahu Navi can come at any moment. And what will he say? And he has the koyach. We quoted from the Chassam Sofer that since he's coming beguf, so he can pasken dinim. It's not Toira Bashamayim, Neshama beguf. And he might say that this is completely Toira. It has to be burnt because it's chametz, but you're being metamet. So even Tuluyu you can't burn. So already that the Gemara could have stopped here. We quoted enough from the Braisa to see that Rabbi Yossi understood the Rabbi Meir as comparing it to Kachim and not to the case of the barrel of Truma. But the Gemara is going to continue on Daf Tezvav Amid Beis to quote the other part of this Braisa, which is also Negeya according to many Rishonim. Right, Rashi writes in the top, before we even read the end of the quote of Rabbi Yossi, Lo tzarech. It's not needed because really it's already clear, but we're going until the end. Now, we're learning another din that actually sounds very much like Rabbi Chanina. The Rabbi Yossi says, when you have pigul is kachim, that if the kohen while he was doing any one of the four steps of the avodah, shchita, kabbalah, hilocha, and zrika, the kohen had in mind, had a machshavas, that some other part will be done beyond the prescribed time, and machshavas chutz lizman, that machshava is mefagel all of that carbon, and one may not eat it under the penalty of kares. And here's the key: midoiraisa pigul is taka asur b'ham. You have to burn it, but it's not tummy. Midrabanan, it's tummy. The Chachamim said on a very interesting level that if you touch pigul, your hands become tummy. There's a certain rabbinic tuma on pigul. Similarly, noisa. If you have noisa, means meat that was actually left beyond its prescribed time. So we just spoke about the carbon toida. There was a day and a night. What happens if you didn't finish eating it by day and by night? So then in the next morning, it's called noisa. Again, noisa means that if you eat it, God forbid, you're chayv kares. Noisa has to be burnt. It's not tummy. Midoiraisa, it's not tummy. On a rabbinic level, noised is matamas hayodayim. So says Rabbi Yossi that when you have pigul and noised and actually tamei, this is so similar to chametz, that's truma, because you have to burn it, but it's not tamei, at least not midoiraisa. Beis Shammai says ein nisrafim ka'achas. Beis Hillel says nisrafim ka'achas. This Beis Hillel is so similar to Rabbi Chanina that in the Yerushalmi, the Gemara asks who even needed the Rabbi Chanina. We already have a Beis Hillel. And by the way, that will make us, the answer the Yerushalmi gives, and that goes on, that we better appreciate the whole sugi in Bavli, the Yerushalmi, is araya that Rabbi Chanina was not speaking about a piece of meat that was tamei on the level of a shlishi. Because if the tuma was only midrabanan, the shlishi, that you can burn it with the rishon, that we know from Beis Hillel. Gavaldik. This is very much that Yerushalmi proves that the Reish Lakish's understanding that we learned today is correct. That Rabbi Chanina was speaking about Shlisha and Nishan Midoiraisa. That is something that we don't know from Beis Hillel, correct? Because Beis Hillel is speaking about burning. Beis Hillel is speaking about the Rabbanan and Doiraisa. That's the Rabbanan and Doiraisa. I'm sorry, that's even worse. I made it worse now. The Yerushalmi all asks for that because if you can burn something that's tummy, they're abundant with a doiraisa, which means you're being metamit on the level of doiraisa completely. That means midoiraisa, right? You're making it tummy. It's tohoira. Pigul and oisel is tohoira. So what is it? So what is Rabbi Chanina adding? This is a big discussion we have in the Yerushalmi. Just to be aware of that. Okay, we can also say that this is an achanami. This is just an elaboration of Shittas Beis Hillel. There's a Pnei Shor. There's many achronim that speak about like why do we need the whole Rabbi Chanina here when we already have it in Beis Hillel? But let's leave that. Okay, so let's come back over here. So says the Gemara v'isal kadaita. Let's go back on what the approach we explained today. That Rabbi Meir mit divrei Rabbi Yeshua ka'amar, the Rabbi Yeshua and Trumais. This whole Braisa doesn't make sense. You see from the way Rabbi Yossi was refuting Rav Meir that he understood that Rav Meir was drawing his analogy from the case of Kachim from Rabbi Chanina. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, that Rabbi Yossi lavadate. I stand my ground. Rabbi Meir made his comparison to the case that you can capture Truma in a Tamadik Keli. You're being metamed the Truma because it's going to Ibud, to save the Chulin. That was his analogy. Rabbi Yossi didn't know that. Rabbi Yossi thought that Rav Meir learned his din from the case of Rabbi Chanina. So based on that mistake, he says, how can you compare? By the case of Kachin, right in the Mishnah, it's Tamei. Actually, now perhaps this is also part of what the Gemara says in Eruvin regarding Rabbi Meir, Eruvin Yud Gimel, that lo yachlu chaveirov la'amod al soif datoi. Here you go, lavadate. You know, it's not that he couldn't get to the depth of his svara. He didn't even know what he is comparing it to. The who savar, Rabbi Yossi erroneously thought that Rav Meir medivrei Rabbi Chanina is kind of Adam ka'amarle, and therefore Rabbi Yossi says Einam in Amida, and elaborating as we learned in the Braisa, but it didn't end. The conversation didn't end, and then Rav Meir tells him, "You didn't understand me." Va'amar le here means Rav Meir now tells Rabbi Yossi, "No, Anomi de Rabbi Yeshua kamina," and he told him the Rabbi Yeshua that we had today, the fifth approach from the case of the barrel, the wine press. And on that, Rabbi Yossi still refuted him. At least we understand now the back and forth. So says Rabbi Yossi, because the Homoid Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua regarding Truma, that's Chametz, with Truma, that's Chametz Tahira, and Truma, that's Chametz Tameya, Shesoyre Zu B'fnei Atzmai V'Zu B'fnei Atzmai. Okay. Now the problem is, again, I know this question is even much stronger according to the third approach, but we're going on to say that here. Now that we're focusing on today's answer, so we said that Rabbi Yossi tells Rav Meir that even if you compare it to the Rabbi Yeshua over there by Trumais, it's also Eina min Hamida. Now these words don't make sense. It's not analogous. Why not? Mida umida. It's perfectly analogous. Perfectly analogous. Because the case in Trumas was, guys, remember, the wine in the upper wine press is completely tahira. It's completely tahira. You're capturing it in a vessel. The vessel is tamei. Now it's going to become tamei a minute later or a second later, but you're making it tamei earlier. You're being metamid biyadayim. So it's a perfect analogy. Chametz is going leibud. You're being metamid biyadayim. You're burning it. So the Gemara says, yeah, you're right. The reason why it's not Einam and Amida is for another reason. Ushani Hassan, by the wine, there is a justification for you to go ahead and to you to capture the truma in a keli that's tummy. You know why? You're doing it. It's not that it's becoming tummy anyway, so be matama it. You're not allowed to do that. Since you're trying to save the wine that's chulin, that's a justification. Therefore, you can say, since the truma is going leibut, so let it go into another keli. But there's a reason. There's a hefset chulin. When you're burning two piles of chametz, right? Why would you burn them together if you can burn them apart? You're not saving anything. That's what the Einam min Amida means. Beautiful. I maskevlo Rabbi Yirmiyah mi masnisen. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, hold on, masnisen nami, the case of our Mishnah. The case of Rabbi Meir, there is something to benefit burning them together, which is Ika Hefsed de Eitzim. Well, if you have to make two piles, you have to make two piles of wood, you got to use a little bit more fuel. So Elyahu Sava, guys, it's good to know that Tosfos Chulin Davav on the top, Daf Amud Aleph says, Yesh Mefarshim, that whenever the Gemara says that elder, it refers to Elyahu Hanavi. Elyahu Hanavi still tells, and Rabbi Yirmiyah, he was the Chacham from Maidav, right? That was Sanhedrin Daf Yud Zayin. He was a sharp. All of his boyas, his boyas are the real boyas. So he says, no. Lehefsid meruba chashushu. You can't compare one case to the other. Yeah, if you're gonna lose the vat of chulin, that's a real loss. That justifies. Lehefsid muat, adding a little bit of wood is loy chashushu. How great is that? We quote a few times. I forgot which Rebbe said that. Why do we say teku tishbi yataretz? Why not Moshe Rabbeinu yataretz? Moshe Rabbeinu was the origin of everything. So he explained that to answer a halachic question, you have to know the question, you have to know the mitzias, you have to know the person, you have to know this culture, you have to understand the world. Elyahu Navi always comes back, he understands the world. Here you see this Sava, if it's Elyahu Navi, notes how do you define hefsid meruba, hefsid muat? It's one of those areas in halacha that's really not that clear. Is it objective? Is it for you? Maybe for certain people, a little bit of wood is called hefsid. You really have to understand the person and the world. This is Elyahu Navi was able to make that determination. Okay, back over here. Now, again, what we didn't close, the only loose end is that we explained what Rav Yossi tells Rav Meir, all based on a shlakish. But what we did not explain is that based on the third answer that we gave yesterday, right? That we understood that the Mishnah is speaking about a kachim that shlishi midrabanan, very similar to the pigel and noiser. That was the case of the Mishnah. And he's giving a great analogy, Rav Meir. So again, why did Rabbi Yossi tell him Einem and Amida? Why Einem and Amida? That we didn't explain yet. But now you're going to see from the Hemshech of it, we're going to get to it. But Omar, first of all, Omar Abasi, Omar Rabbi Yechanan. I want you to know that, yes, we have a machlekes and a Mishnah between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi doesn't allow for you to burn chametz, that's truma, that's tahor. You can't burn it together with chametz, that's truma, that's tameh, because you're going to be matama the chametz. But you know where Rabbi Yossi says that? Machlekes is only on the 6th hour, because on the 6th hour, on a deoraisa level, you may still eat chametz altogether. The whole isur midoraisa only begins from the 7th hour. Avol b'sheva, even though it's not tameh, but now that it's us and midoraisa, says Rabbi Yechanan, divrei hakol soifen. Everyone will agree that you can burn them together. Now, for him to come to this point, we really have two ways of understanding Rabbi Meir, either the third approach or the fifth approach. So the Gemara is going to think, for Rabbi Yechanan to say that, it must be that Rabbi Yechanan understood the Mishnah dafka like either the third or the fifth. That will lead him to say what he said, and let's speak it out inside. Amalei Rab Zeiro, Rabasi, that name al-Chura, we should say that Rabbi Yechanan understands not the way we learned the Mishnah in the fifth approach. He learned the Mishnah the way we learned it in the third approach. That Rabbi Yechanan understands the Mishnah was speaking about the Avatuma Doiraisa. Vlad means Vlad. Atuma was the Rabbanon. And like we learned the third approach. Then I accept what Rabbi Yechanan is saying. Because if Rabbi Yechanan would have been understanding Rav Meir the way we learned it today, which allowed him to understand the case of Kachin being Doiraisa, Rishon Shlishi, then I don't know if Rabbi Yechanan would have said what he said. Now, what are we talking about? So I'll tell you what, I'll tell you by heart. What we're really talking about is, we're not focusing that much on the fact that on the 7th hour, Rabbi Yechanan is saying that Rabbi Yossi will be moided that you could burn it together, but we have another understanding over here, that when does Rav Meir allow for these two truma to be burned together on the 6th hour? Because at least on the 6th hour, midrabanan, you no longer can have achila, you no longer can have hana'ah. What happens if you want to burn Rav Meir, the chametz, before the 6th hour? Can you do that? If Rav Meir learned it from the case of Rabbi Chanina, then Rav Meir would say absolutely not. Because this whole analogy is that just like Rabbi Chanina allows you to burn Rishon Midoraisa with a Shlishi Derabanan, because it's Tami Derabanan, you can burn it together. So he allows you to burn Chametz, even though it's Tahira, but since Midrabanan you can't consume it, you can burn it now with a Doraisa. But it has to have some rabbinic invalidation now. If we were to understand that Rabbi Meir was referring to the case that we learned today, the case of the barrel of wine, and we read that Rashi inside, why are you allowed to capture it in the barrel that's tummy? Because it's going le'ibud. Going le'ibud means that right now, it's not the problematic doiraisa. Right now, it's not tummy midrabanan. It's later going to go to ibud. I know later doesn't mean tomorrow. Later means soon. But here, maybe Rab Meir would even allow you to burn it before the 6th hour. Gavaldik.
What do you mean before the 6th hour? What in the 5th hour?
Rabbi Yechanan really was trying to Rabbi Yechanan seems to be emphasizing the ikir that Rabbi Yossi will be moided to Rav Meir, that on the 7th hour you can burn it together. When do they argue? On the 6th. Why not on the 5th? It's mashma from Rabbi Yechanan that Rabbi Yechanan understands that Rav Meir also will admit that on the 5th hour you cannot burn it together. Now, if Rav Meir would have learned his din from today's Rabbi Yeshua, then he would have allowed you even to burn it on the 5th hour. The truma is completely tohira, it's going liibud. Great. Now, you can argue not so, but he wanted to confirm that. Maybe not. So says the Gemara, no, maybe Rav Meir wouldn't be that lenient, but still, if his limit is from Rabbi Yeshua, then why are you telling me that he argues b'sheish? He would have allowed it l'chu'ura even earlier. Says the Gemara, we accept that. Enochanami. Amalei in, that for Rabbi Yochanan to make a statement. Rabbi Yochanan's real chiddush, his emphasis is on what Rabbi Yossi holds. But the fact that he says that they argue b'sheish, machloikas b'sheish, that means that Rabbi Yochanan understands that Rav Meir would not allow you to burn them together b'chamesh. It's not about it's being hoylech leibur. It's about, since on a rabbinic level it's already invalidated, so therefore you can invalidate it further also only midrabanan, like we explained yesterday, that we are going that ein oichel matama oichel midoiraisa. And itmanami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, look inside, masnisin ba'ava tuma doiraisa. And velada tuma derabanan. Clearly, umay medivrei Rabbi Chanina skana kehanim. Emachloikis b'sheish, avol b'sheva divrei hakol sarfen. Now the Gemara says to the Braisa we learned on top, Lema misayele hapigol v'hanoiser v'hatome. As we learned, this is Rabbi Yossi speaking. Beishame says ein nisrafim ubesil oimim nisrafim ka'achas. So what's the raya? So the raya is, says Rashi around 13 lines before the end of the narrow lines, that Rabbi Yossi Amalei Liel, v'kamalei Rav Meir, b'had be'amri beisilol nisrafim ka'achas mishum depigol v'noisi asirim midoiraisa. Aval b'isura derabanan. I mean, what was his emphasis? That they burned them together because pigol and noisi is asirim midoiraisa. Aval b'isura derabanan. If the whole is, aside of them being tamei on a derabanan level, but don't forget that pigol and noisi are invalidated midoiraisa. And yes, Rabbi Silo holds you can burn them together. But what Rabbi Yossi means to say is that they're not going to allow you to take something that's only us in midrabanan, which was the case of Rabbi Meir, right? Because on the 6th hour it's only Tami derabanan, that you cannot be metami. That is what Rabbi Yossi is telling to Rabbi Meir. So we understand from that statement that he's acknowledging that when something is asur on the doiraisa level, even though it's not tamei on a doiraisa level, Beis Hillel holds you can burn it together. So Shmeinim Nino that by the beiser doiraisa moide Rabbi Yossi that you can destroy two items together, the both asur midoiraisa, even though on a doiraisa level it's not tamei. Afalgav the leka shame tuma oleho. So the fact that Rabbi Yossi knew the din of Beis Hillel, l'choira, is araya that on the 7th hour you can burn them together, because on the 7th hour, truma that's tohoira is asur midoiraisa. So that should be similar to pigol and noiser, which is asur midoiraisa, and Beis Hillel says you can burn it together. How can Rabbi Yossi argue with that? But there is a difference, my friends. What's the difference? The difference is that not only is pigol and noiser asur doiraisa, it's also tamei derabanan. I know it's not tamei doiraisa, it's tamei derabanan. So when they burnt it together with kachum, that's tamei. I know that they're upping the level of tuma, but they're not going from something that's tohoida to tameya. So you can't prove, Rabbi Yochanan cannot prove from this brayso that Rabbi Yossi will be moided that on the 7th hour you can burn them together, because you can be machalik. Tak on the 7th hour, chametz dikatruma is asur doiraisa, but it's not tamei at all. Shani Hassan, no proof. Over there at least, the islu tuma midrabanan. So when you have something that aleph is asur midoiraisa, beis it's tamei midrabanan, then you can burn it with kachim that is tamei. This is all to tell Rabbi Yochanan you can't prove it from the case of Beis Hillel. Tetnan hapigol v'hanoisid. This is midrabanan metamem esayodayim. But on the 7th hour, my friends, what's the din of chametz on the 7th hour? I know that it's asur midoiraisa, but it's not tamei even on the derabanan level. So Rabbi Yossi cannot have Rabbi Yochanan cannot prove his case bishitas Rabbi Yossi from the din of Beis Hillel. Very good. Now let's go further. We're trying to find a proof for Rabbi Yochanan, who's machadish. His chiddush here is that Rabbi Yossi will be moida to Rabbi Meir that on the 7th hour you are allowed to burn truma that's chametz completely tohoira, even midrabanan it's tohoira with truma tamei. It says in a brayso pasha ipsha, if you have moldy bread. Now there's different levels of moldy bread. V'nifsla melachol adam, no longer is edible to a person, but v'hakelav yachol la'achla. So the din is mitama tumas echol and mikabetza. Number one, food that is tamei that also has the koyach to be mitamei. By the way, when we learned yesterday that ein oichel mitama oichel midoiraisa, according to some opinions, but oichel can be mitama mashkin lukula alme midoiraisa. Okay, so when now there's a shiur of how much food do you need in order for it to be able to convey tuma. Whether food needs to have a minimum amount for it to acquire tuma is a machloikas rishonim. Lekula alma, for tummy dika food to be able to convey tuma, it needs to have at least the amount of a kibetza. So first of all, the Brisa says that even if you have food that is so moldy that a person cannot eat it, if it's still edible for an animal, and we dafka pick a dog, we learned this together, I think in brachas, that dogs are nebach, right? They lack food. It's a mitzvah to give food to a dog, even on Shabbos, even if it's not your pet. So not anymore in America, but there used to be a nebach on the dog. So then, it's still called food. And if it's truma, that's the case here. If it's truma, then it could be burned. Right, it could be burnt with tameya on Pesach. Now, what do we see over here? Okay, I get it that it's moldy, so it's not edible, but it's not tamei at all. It's not tamei at all. This Brisa is saying that it can be burnt with tameya, because since you can't eat it because it's moldy, well, on the 7th hour you can't eat it either because it's also midoiraisa. So the Gemara says, "Vaited, it's not a proof." Shani Hassan the Afra Ba'almahu. Don't forget the Brisa is not speaking about just the fact that it's Pesach. It's not pas on Pesach. It's about moldy. So maybe when something is moldy and it's physically like dust, there we will allow you to burn it with tameya, even though you're being metamid. But that doesn't prove what Rabbi Yochanan is learning pshat and Rabbi Yos. And now the ihachi here is mamish exactly the way it means. The ihachi. Ihachi, now that we explained, all right, that what? That we do not compare it, that Rav Meir learned from Rav Chanina, right? So my moide, right, when it says in the Mishnah, moide Rabbi Eliezer, because the 5th answer that we explained is Gavaldik. Rav Meir learned it from Rabbi Yeshua by Truma. First, Rabbi Yossi misunderstood him. Eine min amida. So Rav Meir says it's exactly min amida. So then Rav Meir clarified, I didn't compare it to Rabbi, I compared it to over there. So then he added, it's not comparable to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. But according to the 3rd approach that we learned yesterday, and now we're establishing, this is important, that Rabbi Yochanan also understood that pshat in the Mishnah, that our Mishnah is speaking about kachem shlishi midrabanan, which is why he compared to Truma on the 6th hour, which is asur midrabanan. So what's the moide Rabbi Eliezer? What does that have to do with anything? So says the Gemara, Hachi ka'amar le Rabbi Yossi Rav Meir, afilu Rabbi Yeshua the Meikal. First of all, he tells him, I disagree with you. We'll see why he disagrees. Now we have to, it's a great comparison. I disagree with you with your comparison to Rabbi Chanina. And even if you're going to say that I'm right in refuting the comparison between the case of Chametz to the case of Rabbi Chanina, but you do have, and we learned today, 2 Mishnayos in both cases, Rabbi Yeshua was lenient. Say he was lenient in you, not be a dayim, but allowing something that anyways cannot be consumed to become tamei quicker. Say in the case where he allows for you to be matama, the truma that's trickling down in a keli, that's tamei. Matama be a dayim to save the chulin. Rabbi Yeshua's mekel. So he says you can't even compare to that also. Because ki mekel, either b'teluya v'tameya, right? Teluya v'tameya, both cases, but avol b'tohoira v'tameya loy. It's not analogous to either one of them, as we explained. Okay, so at least even according to the 3rd approach, we did eventually hint to Shitas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in Trumais to both Mishnayos. But now, okay, let's go with the 3rd approach. But this is especially Rabbi Yochanan. It's exactly the same. Guys, let's look inside the Rashi. Around 8 lines under the Gemara. It's like, that I've made Rabbi Chanina Yalif. Just like the case of Rabbi Chanina, according to Rabbi Yochanan, according to the 3rd approach in the Gemara, the kachim was only tamei midrabanan. Now, if not for Rabbi Yochanan, right? See, if not for Rabbi Yochanan, I would say still not exactly the same. Why is it not exactly the same? It's not exactly the same because kachin is tamei on the level of shlishi. That's the case of Rabbi Hanina, according to this understanding. This truma b'shah sheish is not tamei at all. You can't eat it midrabanan, but it's not tamei at all. So you would be able to understand when Rabbi Yossi says eina min amida, don't convolute isur achila or isur even hana'a midrabanan to tuma. There's no shame tuma. But now that you, Rabbi Yochanan, are saying that even Rabbi Yossi is moida, that b'shah sheva you could burn them together, why would Rabbi Yossi say so? I know that on the 7th hour the truma is already invalid midoi raisa, but it's still not shame tuma. It's chametz. So once you're telling me, you Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yossi agrees that you could compare something that's completely prohibited to something that's tamei, because they're both equally tamei. So now I don't understand. That's the iyachi. Why is Rabbi Yossi saying eina min amida? It's perfectly min amida, like we explained. Here, shlishi is midrabanan, but tamei, the kachim, and they allowed it to be burnt with something that's tamei on a level of the da'iraisa. You're being moisiv to the tuma. But anyways, we have to keep rabbinic law. It's invalid tuma. So here also, Rav Meir holds that you can burn these two trumas together, because b'shah sheish it's also midrabanan already asur ba'na. So what's the eina min hamida? Amay eina min hamida midahu. So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now we're adding the final understanding of Rabbi Yochanan in Rabbi Hanina, that our Mishnah bebasar shenitma b'mashkin shenitmu machma sheretz. Okay, how exactly did the meat become a shlishi? Let's go back to that. So now at the end of yesterday, we explained how it became tamei derabanan. Now we're going to learn another way that it became tamei on a level of a shlishi midrabanan. And what was that? You have a sheretz. Sheretz is enough. The sheretz touches mashkin. Now this mashkin touched the kosher meat. Now, can mashkin bechlal convey tuma to anything? To anything, it can become tummy. Could it convey tuma? That's a machlokes midoiraisa. Guys, midrabanan, you bet it conveys. Can it convey tuma midoiraisa? That's the actual machlokes between Ameir and Rabbi Yossi. And now everything becomes a l'shitasi. For us, the Rav Meir l'tamei and the Rabbi Yossi l'tamei. Rav Meir l'tamei, the Omer tumas mashkin l'tamei acherim is only the Rabbanon. This is so great. And therefore, what was the meat? The meat, mida'iraisa, the shlishi, the kachin that Rab Chanin is talking about is completely permissible. It's only tamei midrabanan. Yet, he's saying a testimony that they burnt it with kachin that's tamei on a level of da'iraisa. And therefore, you are making it tamei, something that on a Torah level is completely pure. You're being why? Because since midrabanan, you can't have it anyways. Fine. Rabbi Yossi holds tumas mashkin l'tam acherim is de'oiraisa. So how can you compare meat that they taka burn together with the rishon, but anyways it was tamei de'oiraisa to chametz b'shah sheish? And a chanami, that's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. Once the truma that's chametz is asan mid de'oiraisa, yes, you can burn it with the, even though you're being metamet. But b'shah sheish, it's only midrabanan. You are comparing it to the case of Rabbi Hanina. According to Rabbi Yossi l'tamei, the shlishi was tamei d'oraisa. This is so beautiful. That's why Rabbi Yossi l'tamei, it's not min amida. Now, where do we find your machlokes? The Tanya, let's chap around the last few lines after Zayin. Safek mashkin. Again, you have a safek mashkin. You have a safek whether mashkin became tamei. So again, there was different liquid. There were beverages in a room. Someone who was vadai tamei walked in there. There were many barrels of liquids. He touched one of them. You don't know which one he touched. I'm just referring back to the D. So forget about the rules of, the Torah already said, safek tamei b'reshus hayachid. You have a safek mashkin. If you can't use the rules of safek tamei b'reshus rabban b'reshus hayachid, then you have to go back to the other klal that we said by Yisurim. Safek da'araisa l'chumra, safek da'rabanan l'kol. So, mashkin acquiring tamei, that's midoiraisa. Safek mashkin li tamei with it. Whenever you hear the chidik, it's to become tamei. If it's a shva li tamei, it's to convey tuma. Safek mashkin li tamei tamei. Safek doraisa l'chumra. But litame acherim, if you had such liquids, if you have a liquid that's tummy, and you have a doubt whether the liquid touched something else, so you took tummy liquid and you threw it, you spritzed it in a room, you know that it hit something, but not all things. You don't know which thing it hit. So Rav Meir holds tar. Why would he say tar? Because since Rav Meir holds that mashkin is only metame other things, only midrabanan, so you have a suffix in a din derabanan. Suffix in derabanan is svekay tar, your kulakula. The chenoy Rabbi Lazar oimer kidvarav, like Rav Meir. That mashkin is only metame acherim midrabanan. Rabbi Yehuda oimer, however, la koil tame. Mashkin has the koich to be metame everything midin toira. Rabbi Yosi, which is negeh to us, and Rab Shimon hold like this: lo oicholim tameim. That mashkin has the koyach to be metama oichlin mido iraisa. That's connected to our Mishnah, but he holds that mashkin don't have the koyach to be metama kelim mido iraisa. It's metama kelim midrabanan, but the suffix tami midrabanan is lekula kelim tohirim. So everyone goes l'shitasi, and now we closed up. We explained the back and forth of the Mishnah, both according to the fifth opinion, and then now going back to the third opinion with this new nuance of explaining how the kachim was a shlishim with Rabbanan, God willing, to be continued. Wow.
Thank you.
Excellent.
All right, guys, to be continued. We just started.